President Obama talked up his year-old economic stimulus program today and made a fresh appeal to skeptics. At the same time, he conceded many Americans don't see the benefits yet.
1 year later, it is largely thanks to the Recovery Act that a second depression is no longer a possibility.
President Obama issued that declaration this morning, 12 months after he signed the Stimulus Act into law.
It's one of the main reasons the economy has gone from shrinking by 6% to growing at about 6%. And this morning we learned that manufacturing production posted a strong gain. So far, the Recovery Act is responsible for the jobs of about 2 million Americans who would otherwise be unemployed.
That jobs claim is supported by some independent analysts, including the Congressional Budget Office. But counting those jobs is not easy, says Mike Graybell. He's part of a team tracking the stimulus for the investigative news service ProPublica.
There's a lot of factors that go into counting a job. It's not like lining up a work crew and tapping hard hats. In addition to that, there are these indirect and induced jobs, things like when people who have gotten extra food stamp money or unemployment benefits are now going to the store and being able to buy as many groceries as they used to. Put all that together, you're saving the job of a grocery clerk.
Following the money of the $787 billion allotted for stimulus, $120 billion has gone so far to tax cuts for individuals and small business. Billions more have gone into public works, including 12,500 transportation projects. Still more has gone to health care, smaller programs like the national parks, energy research, and to 2,800 defense projects. But Graybell says those are the exceptions.
What we've seen in the first year is that most of it has gone out in tax cuts or in these safety net programs and not in the projects that would make the stimulus more visible.
In fact, Graybell says less money has been spent than originally forecast, and much remains to be doled out.
Some of the money went out right away. They were able to sort of press a button and give out extra money in our paychecks. They were able to give out Social Security checks. Other money like the infrastructure or programs like renewable energy or high-speed rail where they had to write rules take a lot longer.
The White House has mounted a full-tilt effort to tout the stimulus, sending Vice President Biden and cabinet members across the country.
If you build it, they will come.
Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood was in Kansas City, Missouri today. Nevertheless, polls show many Americans just don't think it's working.
The bill still generates some controversy.
The president today blamed negative perceptions in part on Republicans. He ridiculed many in the GOP for dismissing the effectiveness of the stimulus, even as they claim credit for its largesse.
There are those, let's face it, across the aisle who have tried to score political points by attacking what we did, even as many of them show up at ribbon-cutting ceremonies for projects in their districts.
At the same time, though, the president acknowledged many Americans don't see any improvement, as unemployment hovers near double digits.
Despite the extraordinary work that has been done through the Recovery Act, millions of Americans are still without jobs. Millions more are struggling to make ends meet. So it doesn't yet feel like much of a recovery.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell hit that point in a statement lambasting the stimulus. In the first year, he said, Americans have lost millions of jobs, the unemployment rate continues to hover near 10%, the deficit continues to soar, and we're inundated with stories of waste, fraud, and abuse. But the president said the Recovery Act had been run cleanly and transparently. He also claimed the program will save or create another 1.5 million jobs this year. In the meantime, the Federal Reserve estimated today that unemployment will stay between 9.5% and 9.7% through 2010. And now two very different views on the stimulus package 1 year out. John Cochran is professor of finance at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and was an early and vocal opponent of the stimulus plan. Lawrence Mishel is president of the Economic Policy Institute, a Washington think tank. He's principal author of The State of Working America, an annual study of U.S. labor markets and living standards. John Cochran, a year later, what do you see? How effective was the stimulus package?
Well, it may have been politically effective, but the idea that it was going to raise output or increase employment, I don't think has panned out. So I'd give it a net zero on those questions.
What about the claim that the stimulus money helped stave off the possibility of a second depression?
Well, I don't think that claim is true. I mean, the stimulus, in the end, is taking money from one place and giving it to another place. And it's too easy to forget that you had to take money from somewhere in order to do any stimulating.
Lawrence Mishel, you think the president had it about right?
I think he does. Professor Cochran has a theory, but the evidence I would offer suggests that it did have an effect. If you go to the economic forecasters who make their money doing this, they confirm that we've saved around 2 million jobs in the process. If you look at what actually happened in the economy, in the beginning of 2009, we were losing 750,000 jobs a month. In the last 3 months, we were losing about 35,000. This wasn't by accident that we went from a deep decline in the economy to an actual growing economy. Now, we're far from where we need to be, but the reason we're far from where we need to be is because we were in a really deep hole. In March 2009, before the Recovery Act had any impact, we had an unemployment rate of 8.6%, and we had already lost a historically large proportion of all our jobs.
Where do you see the biggest impact?
Well, I think the early impact was from a lot of the things like giving money to the states so that they didn't lay off our teachers and our public safety officers. There were tax cuts to individuals. There were payments to Social Security recipients and veterans. There was the start of doing some of the transportation and energy projects, all these kinds of things, and unemployment benefits, which went to millions of people who helped support spending throughout the economy. You can measure this. We know that it helps support incomes and spending during this time.
So, John Cochran, you just don't see these jobs, or you see jobs that were not caused by anything from the stimulus money?
Well, it's lovely to tout the benefits, but let's not forget the costs. Like anytime the government spends money, it has to come from somewhere. So you get to see the jobs that the stimulus, I don't want to say created, but the jobs supported by the stimulus. What you don't see is every dollar of stimulus money had to come from somewhere. And if you add up even the administration's numbers, you get hundreds of thousands of dollars per job. And all that money is going to have to be paid by your and my taxes at some point.
What was staying with you, what was the alternative? What did you want to see? What do you want to see?
Primarily get out of the way. Now, let me say, even if there wasn't an alternative, that doesn't rescue the stimulus. If you have a heart attack and the doctor wants to cut your arm off, you can say cutting the arm off isn't going to work, even if you don't know how to fix a heart attack. But our economy went through a credit crunch. Get out of the credit crunch. That's a situation where it can rebound very quickly if only it has stable pro-growth policies ready to let it do so.
But get out of the way at a time when businesses were not hiring.
The question is, would businesses have hired more or less?
And you're saying they would have hired on their own?
The economy can recover very quickly from a credit crunch left on its own with stable, low taxes, pro-growth policies in place. It doesn't need trillions of dollars of government spending to get it going again. That leads to Greece. If stimulus spending led to prosperity, borrowing trillions of dollars and spending it on social programs or government employees, Greece would be the richest country in the world and not one that's about to default on its debt. That's our danger.
Mishel.
The situation we were in is that monetary policy had already driven interest rates down to basically zero. That was not getting us much growth. There was no hiring going on. There was lots of people being laid off. The idea that we should just sit there and do nothing and we just have to tough it out and the market will take care of us is exactly the thinking that got into this deep mess. All administrations, Republican and Democrat, tend to, in a recession, you're supposed to run a deficit. And the reason why you run a bigger deficit is to pump demand up so that there's more goods and services being bought and jobs being created. That's what was done. That's what needs to be done. And we actually need to do much more of that because we're going to see unemployment at 8% 2 years from now. And that's quite unacceptable. That's higher than it ever got to in the last two recessions.
Well, staying with you, what about the issue we raised in the setup about the difficulty of counting, basically, of saying this job goes with a certain set of money? Is that valid?
Well, there's two ways that you can go about this. You know what the effect of certain kinds of spending is on the economy and jobs. And the administration has actually done something pretty marvelous of trying to actually track where all the money went, who got it, and how many jobs were created. And if anything, they understate the amount of jobs being created. So I think there's been a tremendous effort to actually document the impact of this, and I think it's had a great impact. The problem is we were in a really deep hole. We have not gotten out of that hole yet. We need to be creating 300,000 or 400,000 jobs a month. Now we're just about breaking even.
Well, the same sort of question for you, Professor Cochran, because I want to help people understand this. It's not possible to see an alternate universe at this point, right? What would have happened?
That's the difficulty in economics always. It's easy to say, oh, the model said this, the forecaster said that, but it's hard to know what would have happened. $1.5 trillion is a lot of money to spend on maybe even 1 million jobs.
And what do you see? What do you see, or what do you want going forward at this point? Because as Lawrence Mishel just said, now the question is, should we be spending more for another stimulus package?
Well, that's a lovely idea, but the idea that we're going to spend another $1.5 trillion of deficit, increase it even more than that, and spend it on jobs programs, that's just not happening. What we need to do is get back to growth as quickly as possible. And that needs a stable tax system, not the chaos we have now, and pro-growth policies. It's our only hope.
And the $1.5 trillion you're referring to, where is that coming from?
That's the current deficit. The idea of stimulus was just to increase the deficit. From a macroeconomic point of view, deficit is deficit. And the idea is that maybe deficit spending would increase jobs. We've already done $1.5 trillion. Are we supposed to do $3 trillion?
Well, the fact is we do have a huge deficit. We have a huge deficit because we have a huge recession. That's because a lot of people aren't paying taxes because they're out of work, and we're spending other money on safety net programs that happen in a recession. That's what you would want to do. I remember President George W. Bush saying, at a time of war and recession, you want to have a deficit. I don't understand why, and I hear every conservative economist say, at this moment, we don't want to cut spending or raise taxes. So all of a sudden, we hear this other alternative universe.
Go ahead, brief response, Mr. Cochran.
This is not partisan. I didn't like Bush's deficit spending any more than I like President Obama's.
Yeah, but the idea of somehow we get the taxes right and all this kind of stuff, we've tried that before. We had huge tax cuts in the early 2000s. We had the worst recovery on record. We had the only business cycle where the working class did worse at the end of it than they were in the beginning. Actually, no growth in income for a typical working family. If we want to do nothing, we can get that, or we can actually take aggressive action and create millions of jobs and get out of this mess.
All right, we'll leave it there. Lawrence Mishel and John Cochran, thank you both very much.
Thank you.